what's going on, guys? What up? What up? Today was a shit show. I ain't gonna lie. I mean, there's no way to make today sound pretty. Today was definitely a shit show. I'm actually glad today wasn't one of those days where I actually was actively trading because I was doing some back end work for TFC. So I'm actually kind of glad when I looked at a lot of pretty much the chop for most of the day. I'm like, damn, I'm glad I'm not just sitting in this trade. But today was pretty much just where I've kind of realized where you actually have to be very disciplined. That's what I took away from today. Let me just grab something real quick before I get started while everyone kind of rolls in real quick. Quick second. All right, got it. All right, so again, today was just one of those days. I think you needed to be disciplined after we had such a monster rally yesterday. I think we were all pretty much neutral to bullish. I think the price action, consolidation, some slight redness in certain areas. Today was more of a digestion kind of day where if you didn't take those quick 10 to 20% profits, you pretty much saw yourself bleeding out. Your premiums probably getting destroyed. Kevin, that AMD pump was pretty monster, and I'll kind of just give you a background on that. I did not expect that kind of explosive move over 102 that we ended up getting, and I'll get to the chart here in just a second as well after I go through SPY. But that AMD follow through over 102 was pretty monstrous. We actually had Sig on live yesterday afternoon, I think during Power Hour or so. He was talking about the fact that he ended up liking AMD. At that time, it was roughly around $98 or so. Now, I expected to likely retest that $100 mark. I did not expect that kind of follow through and pushing north over 102. So that was a monstrous move. I do expect a little bit more continuation on that if, in fact, the market does have what we would say is our end squeeze pretty much in terms of our last leg of the market rally. So I do see some follow through on today's price action for AMD. It was just a beautiful snapback. Yesterday felt like a little bit of profit taking, and that's why we saw such a massive rally right on the back end of that. So I'll get to that chart in just a quick second here. Let me actually get into looking at SPY real quick, kind of just give you guys a rundown on that. And then I'll get into some individual charts real quick. But we basically saw a nice little push. We had our push over the pretty much our 100-day EMA. That's basically what we've been basing off of. Those of you that probably heard me about the past 2-3 days, I've been saying 407 has been a pretty pivotal level. That's the level that we basically anchored off of since the beginning of August here. And that is yet again the same level I'm going to look basically at going into tomorrow. If we have any kind of meaningful pullback tomorrow morning after some non-farm payrolls that have come out before open, I'm going to look to see if we end up holding that 407 if things pretty much escalate to the downside on the back of the payroll numbers. All right, so 407, again, that's that key pivotal number that I'm going to be watching for. Otherwise, I actually expect us to pretty much hold 411 a half to 411 high. And why do I particularly say 411? Is because if you actually look at the nice little bubble that I have highlighted here, from basically prior distribution, this was prior resistance, you can basically see that was actually the level in which we ended up breaking down from pretty drastically dating back to June 9th. And you saw the meltdown that followed it. So I'm going to look to basically see if we end up testing that breakdown potentially, because as you would pretty much indicate, we are basically at a distribution level, at a supply level that we're sitting at right now. And that's why you see the strong movement that we had yesterday, but now you see the relative chop right now in which bears and bulls are relatively fighting to pretty much continue the last leg of this market rally. All right. So I'm going to look for that 411 half roughly is pretty much the support I'm looking at for the floor. And then we should be able to pretty much snap back and pretty much continue this rally in which you can pretty much see this nice little blue. I want to say it's a little bit of a darker blue, but that's basically sitting at our 200-day EMA right around that 417 half is what I'm looking at for our next stop on this overall uptrend. Granted the fact that we snap back from 411 half as a support. All right. Otherwise, 411 half fails. Again, 407 is that pivotal level, which I think keeps the overall uptrend still intact for that matter. Otherwise, below 407, I think the bear market rally starts to pretty much say goodbye. All right. And that's when things can start to get ugly. All right. So that's pretty much the two levels to the downside, 411 half and then 407. Otherwise, I'm looking at 417 half. And then my overall PT to the upside here is still sitting at this 421 if we do extend and pretty much squeeze above that 200-day EMA. All right. So that's just the two levels up and down, pretty much to give you that gist right there of my levels that I'm watching. Let me get into that AMD chart that you were talking about, Kevin, real quick, and I can pretty much show you what I'm looking at. Basically, off of the daily here, you see a nice little downtrend resistance. Pretty much, I can make a case for a nice little descending broadening wedge off of the daily chart itself, and that's basically what you've seen that you've rallied off of so far. But this is what I was looking at. I actually saw that we hit our head on that 200-day EMA when we actually reported earnings, and that was right at that 100 and a half dollar mark, and that's where we ended up projecting to pretty much come right back down to the 100-day EMA, as you saw. And so we saw the profit taking, we came right back down to 95, and this is when during Power Hour yesterday, I think we started to see a strong reversal with the broader market, and it was roughly right around that $98 mark, um, towards the high at the end of the day yesterday, that I heard Sig pretty much talking about the fact that it started to look good towards the end of the day for a potential swing. Now, in my mind, I was all right if he's actually looking at this to pretty much, for a nice potential swing for a call opportunity. I'm actually thinking that he's looking to retest this pretty much this 200 EMA, in which is $100, that 150 cent move. Basically, right? $150 is basically where he was looking at to retest that 200 EMA, but he got the explosive move past that $100 mark. We saw the beautiful move up beyond that 102 mark, and so supply that I'm pretty much looking at right now stretches on beyond that, in which we can see the stretch up towards 107, and that puts us also right into our downtrend resistance off of this daily. So to answer your question directly, Kevin, I can see this stretching up towards 107. Granted, the fact that you definitely want to see this pretty much base and hold this 103. 103 would definitely need to hold here going into tomorrow. You could probably wick below it, pretty much 102.80, 102.80, but you want to see that pretty much hold and snap back above 103, and you can see this pretty much extend this rally going into what I want to say is the end stage of the rally. Not necessarily maybe tomorrow stretching out to 107, but that's pretty much your upper side of your target here, as pretty much SPY stretches up towards potentially 417.5 and 421, as I'm pretty much looking at for upside targets. That's pretty much where I'm looking at for the upside in the overall move, before we see some pretty heavy resistance and we likely come back down. All right. So I still think that's a pretty decent move. You're looking what, near about $4 upside if you get a pretty much a beautiful dip by entry, right around that 102.80 spot. All right. So that's pretty much the upside. Otherwise, the floor you're looking at in terms of a major support level. If we get even more disgusting in terms of SPY coming back down to as low as what, 407, then we can start to see this retest this 200-day EMA at the 100.50 spot, and that'll likely be retesting the 200-day EMA and hopefully as a support before a reversal. All right, so that's pretty much just giving you a gist of that one. Consume, you mentioned Tesla, and I've seen a lot of reports on Tesla. I'm not gonna lie. Pretty much there's a lot of indications where the algos are pretty much detecting a lot of heavy buying on Tesla right now. So that is not a little bit surprising to me. And usually Tesla is the last one to pretty much, show its last leg of the squeeze, and it also is usually the first one to pretty much also call the top of a lot of the market, generally speaking. Not to say that it's happened 100% of the time, but usually when I see the market start to roll over, usually Tesla starts to roll over first. So I would pretty much anticipate that we see a strong move out of Tesla, that's incoming. Now the question is whether it's going to end up being tomorrow or is it going to be on Monday. You, the structurally, it's not necessarily one of the brightest structures. You can see clearly here a nice little rising wedge action here on the hourly. And as much as a rising wedge is typically bearish, I have not relatively been very confident in a bearish move from a rising wedge during a bear market rally. That's not to say during a regular market times, right? During a bull market rally, that we've seen rising wedges typically break north. But in this market rally that I've seen during this bear time, I've seen a lot of rising wedges break north, and I think this is one of those times where we're likely going to see Tesla break north of this rising wedge. In terms of support, looking to the downside here, we can pretty much retest down towards 916. Next level of support is pretty much pivotal is 907. Otherwise, I'm going to look for a convincing break here. If we can get a convincing break over at 929 here, then we can stretch back up towards our highs, and 943 is going to be my breakout level. And you can clearly see I have a nice little zone. If if I stretch it back out to the daily, give you a better looking idea. I actually have this pretty much stretching up towards 952 or 953, is it? 952 is where my supply pretty much hits, is what I'm looking at for Tesla. So over that 942 spot, you could test this up towards 952. And then if we really start to stretch and we see that more explosive action out of Tesla here, and this is where all the algos are pretty much as right as they're saying that the buying is so much, we can see this really get squeezy over that 952. And I'm going to be looking at this towards 976 here. And why do I say 976? Is because you can also basically see a nice little distribution here as well. If I kind of give you a nice little bubble here as I give you pretty much on SPY, you can basically see where you've had prior distribution here for a multi-day, and then you basically based off of that 976 before you had a very rash breakdown followed by a meltdown. So 976 would be where I would expect to basically retest. That should end up retesting as a resistance, and then that'll be where I would expect this to pretty much top out, and we should get pretty much a reversal back to the downside. All right, but that's pretty much the levels, pretty much from downside to the upside in terms of what I'm looking at. And I do think that Tesla does have more upside as the market rally continues. I think those of you that probably heard me yesterday, I was pretty much saying that I don't think Apple has as much upside as it did compared to yesterday's price action. That it literally just flew. You probably have about another $2 of upside, $2 to $3 upside on Apple. But what in terms of pretty much leading the rest of this rally here on the last legs, you want to say, I think you have more explosive move to the upside here with a name like Tesla and potentially even a Microsoft kind of leading the way per se. All right. So that's another one. As I kind of mentioned Microsoft, I could probably touch on Microsoft as well. You could pretty much see we basically broke right through our 200-day EMA as well. We based right off of that today, and we snapped back very convincingly into that as well. Supply that I'm pretty much looking at here is right up towards this 288 mark. Above 288, I have us testing what was prior resistance, in which we had prior distribution as well here, as I just kind of highlight and show you. This is where basically was your prior distribution. You had a very flat resistance level here right at this 290 to 291 spot. And that's where I would expect to see Microsoft starting to basically top out is that 291 level, right? But of course, you do need to break north of 288 here in order to stretch this up towards 291. All right, so I do think this one has a lot more legs, pretty much towards the upside. That's why I say I would prefer to see kind of a Microsoft and Tesla leading the way in terms of the last leg of this market rally. All right, so that's one I'm going to keep an eye on. Yesterday I talked about Boeing. I still actually have Boeing on my radar as well. This is one that's going to be relatively still on my radar here tomorrow. You have basically what I would call as an ascending broadening wedge type of action here, but you're basically basing right at support. I think you do have one more leg to the upside here on Boeing. Whether that ends up being a pretty strong gap up like what you saw from what is August 1st, potentially it could end up being another strong gap up as well in the coming day here in the next day or two. I think this is another one that has a strong move here. Resistance I'm watching is up towards 172. Above 172, we're going to see this stretch up towards 175 low. So this is one I like a lot. Some pretty much intermediate levels, and that's just looking at today's resistance to see if we're going to get the breakout or not. But we had a little bit of resistance sitting here right around 167.53, and then some resistance right around 166.82 as well. So I'm going to look to see if we can break those little key pivotal levels here tomorrow morning, or if that ends up happening on Monday. But what's more important is this trendline support that you see. We basically close right at that trendline support. You want to see this hold above 166 half here basically, and then we can see this uptrend pretty much start to get explosive. All right. So that's pretty much what I'm going to continue to watch as well. Outside of that, I think today just pretty much looking at the overall uptrends that I saw. I was watching also GLD. GLD had a monstrous day. I think it's worth a look within the coming days here, especially as we see the market starting to pretty much get at its end stage here. I think GLD was actually one that I kind of liked here as well for more so the longer term, if you want to say. But we actually broke an hourly downtrend resistance here today. That's why I say I think it's worth a look here. Going into the next couple of days, I would say keep an eye on it. Some pretty much a pivotal support here you're watching off of your daily here is 166.30. You want to see that end up holding there. Above that breakout and continuation here is looking at 168 half. Otherwise, that could be a little bit of a short-term resistance. But 168.5 breaks, you have minor resistance at 169.30. And then I have a supply currently sitting here right at this 171 roughly is what I'm looking at for overhead supply. So if this continues to hold 166, I think you do have a move up towards 171, bigger picture. And so that's why I think that this is pretty much worth a look here, especially those of you that pretty much you feel a little bit more scared, a little more skeptic in terms of holding tech names as we feel like, the market can roll over any specific day. I think that's why GLD to me feels a little bit more of a safer bet in terms of that. If the market were to roll over, we may end up seeing the precious metals kind of relatively hold up. All right. So that's pretty much just on the back end, being a little bit more conservative outside of looking at tech. All right. But other than that, I think that's just pretty much pivotal names here. Again, we do have non-farm payrolls tomorrow coming out before the open. Let's see how the market's going to respond. I think most indications kind of say that we're going to get a little bit more of a dip. I want to say a little bit more of a pullback to say a better term. And then we'll see if we can pretty much hold again that 411 half spot, or we end up rolling over a little bit further on SPY, hold 407 support, and then what's the key thing is that you're going to want to see them reclaim those key levels, and then we can see a strong reversal back to the upside. All right. Other than that, though, I think that's kind of just a gist of just a few things I was watching. Again, keep an eye on the momentum out of AMD here. Let's see how Tesla does. I think it was relatively an inside day on Tesla today. Relatively a lot of chop. Let's see how Tesla pretty much snaps back. And I'm going to look for Microsoft to kind of lead the way once the market starts to rally, whether that be tomorrow or that be Monday. So Tesla and Microsoft are literally more so my leading indicators right now. I expect them to kind of lead the way more so. But Apple should definitely be in the mix. Like I was mentioning, Apple I think has a little bit more of, not more so as much room to the upside. It should stay elevated. I just don't think there's as much upside. Those of you that remember, you had the nice little flag, a little ABCD action. You had the strong impulse up where you were up about $6 yesterday. Today you had a little bit of a bear pennant, you could say, a little bit of a wedge, but you did break north of it into the close. So that was a positive sign for me that you broke north of that little wedge rather than breaking south. Otherwise, I was going to look towards that support here, which we basically kind of made all still low. Right around that 164 half was that bottoming range, so we could potentially even come back down to that and retest that 164 half. But I'm looking back at the upside resistance here, this overall uptrend, and that's why if you kind of look at the overall uptrend, you can basically see you don't have as much upside unless you break north of 168 low here. I don't think that you have as much upside as I think maybe a Microsoft and Tesla, like I was showing you. All right, but if you break north of 168 low here, 168.30, 168 half, then that's when I think this can really start to get more explosive, and then we can start to talk about this going up towards that 170 mark. All right. So that's pretty much what I was looking at that with Apple compared to the other two names I mentioned, Microsoft and Tesla. Consume, looking at NIO, this has not necessarily been one of my favorites. I expected a little bit more of a better follow through, a better price action here on this one. It just hasn't necessarily given that kind of price action to me. I will say though, what's actually going for it though is that you had a beautiful downtrend break. So the downtrend break here on the hourly here is it's definitely here for you to pretty much get that continuation. But what I would pretty much be inclined to say is that you're likely going to end up retesting pretty much right back down to this low here, which was basically a prior, we want to say prior resistance, prior support. I would pretty much anticipate that we likely end up retesting right back down towards this 20 half to 20 low before we see a solid movement back to the upside. And if you also notice, you do also have a nice little megaphone, I think you want to say here. If I just change up the colors real quick, I'll put it to a bright green. You can basically see a nice little megaphone that's basically sitting here as well. So that's something as well that I was pretty much watching here. You're basically right. You snap the resistance of that megaphone, and so you ended up rejecting so far. So I'm going to look to pretty much see if we basically test the halfway back of this overall megaphone, right at that 20 low, where I see that you have pretty much double EMA support right around that 20.19. I think that's ultimately the spot that you're looking at for potentially a dip buy opportunity, and with absolutely a stop loss in place. But 20.19 is going to be that spot. That's basically the bottom of what I would say is your current demand zone right now. And that's where you're going to look to see a strong reverse off of that 20.19 spot back to the upside. So that's basically what I see right there. Otherwise, if we lose 20.18 here, then we start to pretty much trend right back down towards the bottom of this megaphone, and then we're flirting with breaking down well below $19. All right, so that's pretty much how I see that. It could be pretty much that dip ends up happening tomorrow, and if Tesla ends up pushing, maybe that case be Monday, then we could pretty much see this start to snap back. It just depends how quickly it gets down to that demand zone, that 20.19 spot, and we're able to find a reversal. And maybe it ends up pretty much coinciding with when Tesla actually breaks out as well. All right, but key level 20.19. Let's see if she ends up retesting that the bottom of the demand, and then I would expect a snapback, ideally. All right. Outside of that, though, I guess that'll pretty much wrap up today's session, guys. Tomorrow's gonna be 0 day. Just be a little careful tomorrow. Don't try to go too crazy, too heavy. I would lean more so to say that we're gonna get a morning drop off, and then we're gonna look for signs to pretty snap back above 411 here, as I would expect that to initially hold, and then we can make our move back towards pretty much breaking over our most recent highs. All right, so that's pretty much what I would say. Other than that, trade safe. Tomorrow's gonna be should be fun though. I think it'll be an interesting day compared to this chop fest that we got today. So other than that though, I will see you guys tomorrow. You guys have a great evening and later, everyone.